Welcome to the program. It was a trifecta of good economic news this week. Strong economic growth, strong jobs growth and an interest rate cut. In theory, the government should get some credit. Australia is defying the global economic headwinds. But Tony Abbott isn't about to change tack. He maintains we do better without this bad government and without the carbon tax. Joining us this week, the Minister for Sport and Multicultural Affairs, Kate Lundy. Peter Bentley is from the Labor-aligned McKell Institute. Richard Muller is a former Liberal advisor and public relations consultant. And Peter Dutton is the Shadow Health Minister. Welcome to you all. Peter Dutton, I might start with you. Do you give the government any credit for the strength of the economy we've seen this week?
Well, David, I think if you look at the national figures, there are some impressive figures there, but it defies the discussions we're having on a daily basis with small business people around the country. The country at the moment, for whatever reason, is deprived of confidence both in a business and consumer sense, and people aren't expanding their businesses.
So how do you make sense of that difference? Why do the figures say one thing but your experience another?
Well, I think if you look to the obvious answer, and that is the mining sector, I think is providing an incredible boom for us. But the fact is that small business people in particular are finding it difficult to get credit. They're not putting on extra staff. People are having their overtime cut back. People are seeing their assets devalued. And all of that combines to provide great uncertainty. And I think that's a big part of the problem that the government's got at the moment. People see Wayne Swan up there singing a great tune, but it defies their own experience. And there's a big disconnect between where the government's rhetoric is and the reality for people on the ground.
Richard, you've worked in the private sector for many years. How would you characterise the economy at the moment?
It's clearly in a state of divide. I'd take issue with you on three ticks, because if you look at the state of the economy and the interest rate cut, isn't that the Reserve Bank saying that they're concerned about the economy looking forward? I mean, the data that we had on economic growth was the first quarter of this year, and that showed, if we exclude the mining states from it, it showed that over the last 12 months the economy for 70% of Australians in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania and the Capital Territory grew at 2%. Right? Which is not impressive by any standards.
Impressive by world standards, though.
Well, how can you say 2% is not impressive? It's not as good as the rest of the economy.
True.
Sure, but
and
comparatively
we've got an
speaking,
economy,
we're
but
doing
the rest of the
very well.
world is not riding on record high prices for commodities, which is the bread and butter of our economy, whether they're agricultural or mineral. Nor are they experiencing the very strong, sustained demand from a growing Southeast and East Asia.
Well, just on that, Kate Lundy, how much credit does the mining sector and the mining boom deserve for these impressive figures?
Well, I think the Treasurer acknowledged today that it's a very strong commodities market and we are benefiting from that. But it's important to recognise that other areas of our economy are in fact still growing, and the significance of today's economic news and this week's economic news is that there is still strong growth occurring. It is important to look at that relatively speaking to the rest of the world. We are still in the grip of a global economic downturn, and Australia is consistently performing well. Just to address the issue of small business, with our tax loss carryback measure in this year's budget and the $6,500 rebate for assets purchased, are both measures designed to specifically help small business through what is a tough time.
But getting back to mining, it is driving the economic strength in Australia at the moment, and yet the Treasurer is out there bagging the mining magnates. Shouldn't he be praising them, thanking them?
Well, let's have a look at the whole picture of the Australian economy. What this government's trying to do is make sure that all Australians benefit in the benefits from the mining boom. Many of our measures, including the MRRT, are about making sure we share those benefits. So on the one hand, we acknowledge it, but we also say that we all deserve a share in those benefits. Those resources come out of the ground once, and the government has a responsibility to make sure that dividend is pushed around the country, so not just the mining companies and workers fortunate enough to work in mining at this point in time, we distribute those benefits.
Peter, Richard made the point, when the Reserve Bank cuts interest rates, it's normally because it's worried about where the economy is going and wants to stimulate the economy. That news did seem to jar with what we then saw the following days on economic growth and jobs growth, do you think the Reserve Bank maybe got it wrong?
No, I think the Reserve Bank got it absolutely right, and I personally think they should have been cutting more and earlier. The fact of the matter is we do have a two-speed economy. I don't think anyone's arguing that. But the numbers that we saw yesterday were phenomenal. They at a macro level are very impressive and show that broadly the economy is doing very well. But we do need to recognise, and I think the Reserve Bank in cutting the way it has recognised that the East Coast in particular is doing it very tough. There are retail, manufacturing, there are a range of sectors out there that are doing it very tough, and we need to be providing, housing construction, if you look at yesterday's figures, was right down in the doldrums, so we need to be providing support and we need the banks to be continuing that. But I think the broader message out of those positive and very impressive accounts figures is that we still have a lot of work to do, both, as Kate was saying, in redistributing some of the benefits from the boom, but also, more importantly, I think, is the long term, and we have an economy that's doing very well in mining, very well in a range of different sectors, but is struggling in a lot of other areas, and we really need to look at how we're engaging with Asia.
Across the board, there's a real issue with productivity. Productivity growth has stalled, and we can't underestimate the impact of the massive investment in mining infrastructure that has had on the account figures that have come out yesterday or today. I think the underlying picture is that yes, there is a dramatic two-speed economy, but there is a whole bunch of people on the eastern seaboard who are really struggling, doing it tough. I mean, we look at
isn't that an argument then for spreading the benefits of the boom as the government?
Absolutely, but it doesn't mean that you don't stop real reform for businesses who create jobs.
Well, one of the things.
What are you talking about there? What sort of reform?
Listen, I was really encouraged when the Henry Tax Review was was established. Only one thing's come out of that: massive waste of time, energy, and money. There's been no addressing for small businesses on things like the amount of paperwork they have to do. The instructions for the single-page BAS statement are about almost 200 pages long, for goodness sake. There are real issues. I mean, the availability of credit is astonishing. And not only small businesses, but large enterprises having to go and try to find equity rather than debt because it's so difficult to actually keep your business going with working capital.
This is real business experience that the two sides of politics don't seem to be talking a whole lot about. We're caught in this argument about the mining tax, yes or no, spreading the benefits of the boom, yes or no. Do we need to look at ways to really help those businesses doing it tough? Peter Dutton.
Well, of course we do. And it's not just an east-west divide either. I mean, there are plenty of businesses in Western Australia who are on the fringes of or outside of the direct impact from the mining boom industries, such as automotive, for argument's sake, where a lot of their workers are going to work on the mines, and it's the same in northern parts of Queensland, where in Mackay, for argument's sake, it's almost impossible to get staff to work in the retail sector, and so there's an upward pressure on housing, there's an upward pressure on some of the cost of doing business, not just in wages, and people aren't coping because the sales and the turnover is not there, and it's exacerbated and you see some of this from time to time where there are fly-in, fly-out arrangements and money's not being spent in those particular towns, and in some cases that's for good reason. There's not accommodation there to house the workers. So I don't think we should underestimate how much pain. And going to Richard's point, banks are just not lending money to small business. The loan-to-value ratios have been reduced dramatically. People can't get the sort of valuations that they were, so they're being, crunched from both directions.
What can you do about some of these things?
Well, I think what you've got to do is get confidence back into the minds of business people and consumers. And Wayne Swan might have good numbers to talk about, but when he stands up there and rehearses these lines and delivers them, he just doesn't exude the same confidence that Peter Costello did.
Come on! I've got to take you up on that. So what you're saying is that all of those good economic outcomes don't matter. It's how Wayne Swan says it. That is the most pathetic argument to have a crack at what is a very healthy economy.
I'm just reporting to you the numbers as they are, and that is that people don't have confidence.
You've already acknowledged the numbers are good. All of the forecasts are really
these are
strong
the
for
polling,
Australia.
These are the polling numbers and people's views of your Treasurer.
But hang on, what you're saying with your relentless negativity of the opposition is that it can all be great economic news, but you still don't accept that the country's in far better shape than it's ever, that it could possibly be in the circumstances.
Kate, I'll tell you
all you can do is level a personal criticism on Wayne Swan's style.
I just want to call it how I see it.
Bordering on the most ridiculous.
I just want to call it how I see it, and importantly, how people report it to me from small businesses that we go and talk to.
That's a different issue, and I'm happy to talk about the measures we put in place in the budget for small business, and I've already mentioned a couple of them.
You do seem to be talking more about what focus group research on Wayne Swan.
Let's actually talk about the economic figures and what that impact is on business.
Let's get to this issue of confidence, because Wayne Swan's accused you guys, the opposition and some in business and the media as well, of being doomsayers, naysayers, of talking down the economy. Do you accept any of that? That when it does come to injecting confidence, the stuff that Tony Abbott's been saying hasn't particularly helped?
Karen, I think, David, I think people are hanging on to two things. One is that they think there's going to be a change of government, and they think they're going to be rid of the Gillard-Rudd-Swan experiment, and I think people are saying, we're sitting on our hands until we can get rid of this government. I think that's the first thing that people in business are hanging on to. The second thing is that people know that the fundamentals of our economy are strong because we went into the GFC with no debt. And people understand that if you look at...
Yeah, but the question is about talking down the economy. Do you accept that that's been going on?
No, I don't. And I think if there is a lack of confidence, it's this government telling people that they're fools. I mean, in Newspoll at the moment in Queensland, in my home state, Newspoll is 60-40 against the government. Now, that is nothing to do with the way in which we might report how we believe the government's performing. It's a reflection of how people see this government as being dysfunctional and not delivering for their families.
Except that we're not dysfunctional. We are governing. Legislation is passing. The economic figures do speak for themselves, and they're very positive. So what the observation people are making is that there's relentless negativity from the opposition with no substance.
One of the unwritten stories.
It was only yesterday that Penny Wong was saying that the confidence of Australian consumers will be damaged by what's going on around the world and overseas. So I don't accept your point that it's negativity just from one sector. There's a whole bunch of people who are saying, hey, hang on, yeah, your top-line figure's great. Western Australia is growing faster than China, but the fastest growing economy on the eastern seaboard, with the exception of the mining states, is the ACT at 3.1%.
The interesting thing when we look at the figures that came out yesterday is one of the unsung songs is actually, I think, the maturity of the Australian consumer, and we saw, apart from mining, one of the major drivers was consumer spending, and in addition to that, Richard, we also saw consumer saving, and this was something that 20 years ago we rightly were kind of saying that Australians, we might be living beyond our means, we might be spending too much, and we've actually, I think, seen a maturity of the Australian people in that we've hedged our bets, we're putting aside a bit, but we're also spending it, and consumers
we've been saving about 9% of our incomes for the last 2 years, and that's been fairly consistent over that period. Now, that's, for me, it's one of two things. It's either a change in long-term behaviour as a result of the GFC, or it's still a lack of confidence. It's still a lack of confidence that, hey, I've got to put something away for the rainy day because it might very well be around the corner.
Lack of confidence, let's talk about that for a sec. So we know with the figures this week, we've created, I think, 46,100 new jobs over the last little while. Unemployment's up slightly because more people are entering the workforce and looking for work. That, to me, looks like a sign of confidence that people are now looking for work. They see things turning around, reality doesn't match up with your rhetoric.
I disagree entirely because, put yourself in the position of a worker, a single-income family in manufacturing industry in Victoria. If I was sitting down around the dinner table, I'd be really concerned about losing my job. So of course I'd be trying to go to a two-income family.
But I'd be more concerned if the Liberal Party that you're saying is going to, everyone wants to be in government, is the one that would cut the I think $1.5 billion out of the packages that we put into automotive.
So when you look at it at a granular level, it's
Labor that's doing the good work. It's the opposition that wants to unpick it.
This confidence problem is largely being driven by what we see on the news every night, and that is Europe on the brink, the US underperforming. We've seen weaker growth in China as well. People are worried about the global economy.
Of course they were, David, as they were with the Asian financial crisis, as they were with 9/11, as they were with other economic bumps that have come along the way. Experiences of, the Hawke Keating years, of the Howard Costello years. But I just come back to this fundamental point, and I think that when the history of the Gillard-Rudd sort of period is written, Wayne Swan is going to have to accept his fair share of blame. I mean, Wayne Swan was the architect of, at least in part, the carbon tax, the mining tax. People, 2/3 of Australians are desperately
Sure, but if that's the
concerned about
case,
carbon tax.
surely he also
Let's at
deserves
least
credit
stick to
for
topic.
some of the figures that we're seeing at the moment. I mean, if he's to, if you're going to pin everything on him,
look,
you've got to pin some credit on him too.
And can I say, seeing Australia through the GFC, where we didn't contract as an economy.
We came through the GFC
You
because
have
we
to
had
acknowledge
no debt.
that credential.
I mean, if you look at the debt that places like Spain and Portugal and Italy, all of these places had enormous debt.
When are you going to
Enormous
acknowledge the
debt.
good
We had
economic
no debt.
management of the Labor government through that period of time? It was an extraordinary achievement.
Okay.
It was
Throwing money into the wind is not good economic
creating
management.
jobs when
Can I
jobs
just
were
pick
needed.
up on something Peter was talking about before, and I think we do have a two-speed economy and there are a lot of challenges out there, but I think one of the most important economic documents that's actually going to come out this year is Ken Henry's review of the Asian century. And Australia, as we've seen in the accounts yesterday, we are tied to China. Right now our mining sector is benefiting immensely from China, but I think as we look forward in our economy and look at manufacturing and look at a whole range of other sectors, we need to be tying ourselves to Asia and looking at how we integrate and re-gear the rest of our economy. Look at tourism, look at retail. China right now, this day, has a middle class of 300 million people, the size of the US. By 2040, they're going to have a middle class of 1.4 billion. And this is something both sides of politics and we really need to be looking at and looking at how we re-engineer.
Just on that, do you think we're doing enough, not just with China, but with Indonesia and with India as well, or do you think these economic relationships are underdone?
Can I say we can always be doing more, and I think there's always room for improvement, but the establishment of Ken Henry's Asia White Paper is very significant, and I think when that's released, that's something that both the government, the opposition, and as importantly, if not more importantly, the business sector, our tourism sector, will be really looking at how we engage more. And
Yeah, sure. I mean, that sort of
But
review is
all
very
of our
important, but
export
so is
sectors.
ministerial contact. And do we see enough of the Prime Minister in India and Indonesia?
Having been to India recently, I can attest to the strong interest and the growing strength of the relationship between our two countries. One of the areas with one of my roles in assisting Greg Combay on industry and innovation is ICT, information technologies. And that's an area of our economy where we've long had a strong relationship with India for a whole range
But
of reasons.
you've got to acknowledge it's underdone, this trading relationship with India.
I think it can always be strengthened. I think part of the purpose and the vision behind preparing Australia in the Asian Century paper is to look at those strengths and those ties. But again, can I point back to the budget measures? In the area of supporting the development of skills, of making sure that we have our strong research, development and commercialisation strategies, all of these things, the funding for which has been maintained is very strong and growing in the tertiary and university and R&D sector. That will augur really well for what the economic relationship looks like with these countries.
Okay, which is... Yeah.
And that trade partnership and how we build our businesses
which is
and
great.
providing the skilled people to do that is an essential part of it. And we've been thinking about that for years. We didn't cut R&D funding when we came to government, like the Howard government.
Just finally on this, we do need to move on, but if the story is so strong on the economy, why doesn't the government get credit for it? Surely this does come back to Peter Dutton's point about a lack of confidence in the government and the Treasurer in particular.
Well, I want to pin a couple of things on the opposition here, and that is the relentless negativity and the style of opposition that they are.
You don't take any responsibility for that at all?
I think the atmospherics of the global downturn bite into confidence all of the time, and part of our challenge as a country is to boost the confidence through the strong economic
So
measures.
it's not Labor's fault at all that you are where you are?
I don't think it's too much to ask the opposition to acknowledge when our economy is moving in the right direction, it's going really strongly to say, yes, this is good news, as Joe Hockey did on Bloomberg TV.
Have you wasted any money?
Recently.
Have you wasted any money over the
on
last 4
Bloomberg
years?
TV recently, and he's got into trouble from all of his colleagues
what
for
I'm getting
saying
at is
it.
you don't accept that the political instability that we have seen under this since the last election, because we're in a minority government, because of the problems we've seen within Labor, leadership challenges and a speaker appointed and then having to stand aside, all of this stuff, you don't think that's affected confidence?
I don't think it's affected confidence as much as the opposition likes to say it's affected confidence. I think the confidence issues relate to the global
What about
economic
stabbing Kevin
environment.
Rudd right through the middle of the back? Do you think, did that have any impact on the Australian people and their view of your government?
Just using a little bit of
square
nasty
centre.
emotive language is
Square
not going
centre.
to intimidate the
And
people of
maybe the
Australia.
same's about to happen to Julia.
I don't think we're going to get
Just wanted to touch quickly on this the debate about India, because I think it's an incredibly important one for us to have. And it's not a criticism of the government. I think the same can be levelled against us when we're in government. I mean, we are rightly preoccupied with China. I think that's...
It's where the action's at.
Of course, and that's as you'd expect. I think we're underdone in terms of our engagement with Indonesia, our most important partner. I think PNG, there's a lot of work for us to do there because it remains on the brink. But India, I think, is a relationship that we need to continue to grow because, coming back to Peter's point before, and I hope that Ken Henry is able to bear it out, I think there is enormous opportunity for us. And there is a cultural disconnect, but there are a lot more personal relations now between the two countries that I think will be very exciting for us going forward. But there's no sense in pretending that we can discard our relationships with the United States or Europe. I mean, if the US falls in a heap over the course of the next 12 months, then pity help everybody.
I think there's probably going to be general agreement on that. Richard, you want to just
I was just going to say, I think the big danger for us is becoming too obsessed with China. Because they're in the wonderful position of having truckloads of cash. They can buy what they want. They have a dramatically growing economy. They have a huge presence, and they're trying to secure their future, not in 10 years' time, 20, but 30, 40, 50 years' time.
Yes.
We need to be careful that we do not compromise our future by putting all our eggs in the China basket. We need to be well aware of our citizenship role in the whole of Asia. If China's concerned about food security in 40 years' time and wants to buy up truckloads of Australian land in Northern Territory and whatever, well, what about Vietnam? What about the Philippines? What about Thailand? What about all those other countries which are going to have the same food security issues? We've got to think about what our role as a nation and the values that we have and how we apply that to our decisions today about the future of the country in Asia in 20, 30, 40 years' time.
And can I say that our multicultural character as a nation serves us so well in our engagement, not just in our region but around the world, because we have such a great representation of people who've chosen to make Australia home, that gives us an enormous strength of insight into what is happening, particularly in our region, that serves us very well.
All right, we do need to move on. We'll take a quick break, then we're going to come back and look at border protection and the news this week that an alleged people smuggler was living in Canberra, in a suburb in Canberra, but then fled the country a couple of nights ago. Stay with us.